Around 1427, a large Genoese carrack slowly sailed into the waters off Southampton. It had not sold a single item yet. The merchants on board had no idea how profitable this trip to England would eventually be, but Southampton had already started making money. The captain, Andrea Spinola, brought the Genoese carrack into port. The first charge was anchorage, 3 shillings and 4 pence. Then Jacopo Spinola began unloading the cargo. 279 large bales of woad. This blue dye was essential to the English textile industry. That shipment alone generated 46 shillings and 6 pence in local customs charges in Southampton's records, along with several smaller fees. The ship also carried 17 chests of soap, 3 barrels of wine, and red dye stuffs used for expensive cloth. Different goods generated different charges under different rules. At this point, the cargo had not even truly entered its final English market. Would the woad sell at a good price? Would there be enough buyers for the soap? Would wine prices fall because the market was already oversupplied? Nobody knew. But the anchorage fee had already been collected, the customs charges had already been recorded, and any cargo that needed port facilities could generate more crane and wharf fees. That is the most important difference between a medieval port and a merchant ship. The profit of a merchant voyage was usually unknown until the voyage was over. The port could start earning money before the merchant knew whether he would make a profit at all. Southampton's surviving 15th century port books allow us to see this system in remarkable detail. The records were managed by a city official known as the water bailiff. In 1427 to 1428, the man keeping the accounts was Robert Flores. His job was not to decide whether a ship had been well managed. His job was to record which vessel had arrived, who its captain was, what cargo it carried, who owned the goods, and what fees were owed to the city of Southampton. That is why these books do not look much like a traditional business story. You rarely see something like, this merchant made £100. Instead, you see 4 pence, 2 pence, 10 pence, 1 shilling, 3 shillings, and 4 pence, then the next ship, and the next one. Each individual amount looks tiny, but after a full year, they turn into a very different number. In the financial year 1427 to 1428, Robert Flores recorded total revenue from Southampton's local petty customs of 214.15 shillings and 3 pence. This was not the total customs revenue collected across England for the crown. It was revenue from Southampton's own local charging system. And at a time when an ordinary English laborer might earn only a few pounds in an entire year, more than £200 represented a very substantial flow of cash into the city. And Southampton did not earn that money by sending out its own merchant fleet to gamble on Mediterranean trade. The city did not have to buy pepper. It did not have to predict next year's price of woad. It did not have to hire 100 sailors to sail to Genoa. It only needed other people to keep bringing their ships there. That was the first layer of the port business. Anchorage. A normal visiting vessel entering Southampton waters might pay only a few pence. In the 1427 to 1428 accounts, many ordinary ships paid around 4 pence in anchorage, but the fee could be much higher for large Italian carracks. A Genoese carrack might pay 3 shillings and 4 pence. The ship had not even touched the wharf yet, and the city had already made money. The second layer was keelage. This was another port charge connected with vessels entering, lying in, or using the harbor area. Different ships, origins, and legal statuses could receive different treatment. Local ships, privileged merchants, or people with exemptions did not necessarily pay the same rate. So Southampton's business model was not, see a ship, charge whatever you want. It was a structured fee system shaped by municipal privileges, merchant status, and the type of cargo involved. The third layer was wharfage. The wharf fee. Once the cargo actually reached land, it began using the city's waterfront. The 1427 port books, for example, show ships carrying herring paying local duties and also wharfage. In one entry, a ship carrying 5 less than 10 barrels of herring paid 11 pence in wharfage. Iron, timber, and other heavy cargoes could generate their own wharf fees as well. What was the port really selling here? Not fish. It was selling a safe piece of shoreline, where fish could be unloaded. Without a proper wharf, a ship might have to anchor farther away. Cargo would have to be moved back and forth in small boats, or the crew might have to wait for the tide. Heavy cargo made the problem even worse. A millstone weighing close to a ton was not something a few workers could casually carry ashore. A reliable wharf turned the most difficult part of the journey between ship and land into a paid service. The fourth layer was craneage. Crane fees. This may be the easiest part of the whole port business model to understand. Southampton controlled municipal cranes. Wine barrels, iron, millstones, and other heavy cargo could be lifted from ship to shore. Whoever used the crane paid for it. In the 1427 to 1428 accounts, a shipment of 30 tons of wine paid 10 shillings in craneage. Another vessel unloading 45 tons of wine generated a crane charge of 15 shillings. and there were countless smaller transactions. 1 ton of wine, a few barrels, several packages. Each use produced only a few pence or a few shillings. The crucial commercial feature of the crane was simple. The same machine could be charged for again and again. Today it unloads woad for a Genoese merchant. Tomorrow it unloads wine for an English trader. Next week it lifts a millstone. As long as the equipment still works, each new cargo can generate revenue. The port does not have to build a new crane for every customer. That makes it a classic high fixed cost, low marginal cost asset. Building and maintaining the equipment is expensive, but once the crane exists, lifting one more barrel of wine does not cost very much. The more trade passes through the port, the more times the same infrastructure can be reused. That gives the port a powerful economy of scale. And these charges were not just theoretical lines in a civic account book. Manorial records from the 15th century show real buyers paying crane fees when purchasing millstones. In 1430 to 1431, Aylesford paid the manager of Southampton's crane while buying millstones. In 1433 to 1434, Havant bought a large millstone worth £6 and on top of the purchase price, paid to move it to the crane, paid 8 pence to have it lifted, and then paid shipping costs to move it onward. By 1440 to 1441, the recorded cost of lifting a millstone at Southampton had risen to 12 pence. From the buyer's perspective, all of those were costs. From the port's perspective, they were layers of revenue. The ship had already paid to enter the harbor. Once the cargo reached shore, there was another charge. Use the crane and pay again. And if the cargo then left Southampton overland, it could enter an entirely different charging system. Southampton did not only keep records for goods moving by sea. At the city's northern gate, the Bar Gate, there were also brokerage accounts covering goods entering or leaving by road. Overland cargo could generate local customs duties, pontage, and an especially important Southampton charge known as brokage. Brokage was originally connected with organizing the overland movement of goods, and the fee could even vary according to the distance to the destination. So a bale of goods arriving from Italy might follow a route like this. The ship enters Southampton. Port charges are paid. The cargo is unloaded. Wharfage or cranage is paid. Then the goods are loaded onto a cart. They pass through the city gate. And another set of overland charges begins. The port city did not capture the entire value of the goods. It simply controlled the point where maritime cargo had to become overland cargo. Every time the goods crossed that point, the city took a very thin slice. In that sense, the business model was remarkably similar to that of a medieval money changer. A money changer did not need to own the wool. He only needed wool trading to pass through money. A port did not need to own the wine. It only needed the wine to pass through its infrastructure on the way from the ship into England. So the port was not really earning commodity profit. It was charging for flow. That is why, by the middle of the 15th century, local port charges had become one of the most important sources of municipal income in Southampton. Research on Southampton's charging system in 1448 to 1449 shows that local dues made up a major share of city revenue. The port books recorded seaborne goods and charges such as local customs, anchorage, wharfage, and cranage. Meanwhile, the overland books recorded additional charges generated once goods passed through the city gates. This system had another important characteristic. The port did not depend on one merchant or one ship. It depended on an entire trading network. After 1421, Genoese vessels began arriving regularly in Southampton again. Research suggests that between 1421 and 1458, an average of roughly 10 or 11 large Genoese carracks came to the port each year. On top of that came ships from Flanders, France, Portugal, English coastal towns, and many other places. By the middle of the 15th century, Southampton had become one of England's most important international ports. And here we reach the first reason the port was more stable than any single merchant vessel. Risk was spread out. Suppose you owned one merchant ship. Your entire annual income might depend on 2 major voyages, one to Bordeaux, one to Flanders. If the first voyage ran into a major storm, half of your annual opportunity might already be gone. If the ship was badly damaged and needed months of repairs, the second voyage might disappear as well. But if you ran a port, one delayed ship did not stop the business. The next ship could still arrive. One Genoese merchant losing money did not prevent a Portuguese merchant from paying his own charges. A herring boat being delayed by bad weather did not cancel the crane fee on a ship full of wine. A merchant ship concentrated a huge amount of risk inside one hull. A port spread its income across many hulls, and medieval maritime risk was very real. Historians studying medieval English shipmasters have described the problems a captain constantly had to handle: changing winds that could trap a vessel in a foreign harbor for weeks, storm damage to cargo, pirate attacks, arriving at a destination where the expected return cargo was unavailable, sickness among the crew, and even death. Any one of those problems could determine whether the entire voyage ended in profit or loss. Merchant ships also face the risk of empty cargo space. A ship leaves England full of wool. Perfect. But once it reaches the foreign port, what if there is not enough return cargo? The crew still has to eat. Port stays still cost money. The sailing season keeps getting shorter. A ship cannot wait forever. The owner may eventually have to accept very low freight rates for the return voyage, or sail home with part of the hold empty. A port does not face exactly the same problem. The ship owner fears an empty hold. The port mostly cares about one question: are ships still coming? Even an unsuccessful merchant voyage can still generate port charges. Imagine a carrack arriving in Southampton. The merchants on board expected woad to sell at a high price. Then the English market becomes oversupplied. The price falls by 20%. The merchant loses money. Does Southampton refund the anchorage fee it already collected? No. The crane was used. The wharf was occupied. The service had already been provided. That is the second source of the port's stability. Port revenue was not directly tied to the customer's profit. If the merchant made money, the port charged him. If the merchant made less money, the port still charged him. As long as conditions did not become so bad that ships stopped coming altogether, the port could take its share first. Of course, not every ship and every merchant paid the same amount. Southampton had many exemptions and reduced rates. Citizens of the town often enjoyed better terms. Merchants from some other English cities also possessed privileges. 15th century records show, for example, that Salisbury merchants received specially reduced rates. Bristol merchants could also enjoy partial exemptions. Even identical cargoes might face different local charges depending on who owned them. So the port was not really operating a simple price list. It was operating a system of privileges. Who are you? Where are you from? Are you a citizen of Southampton? Do you belong to a privileged commercial group? What are you carrying? Are you using municipal infrastructure? All of those things could change the final amount you paid. That made the account books complicated, but it gave the city one enormous advantage. As long as it controlled the right to collect the fees, trade itself could become a source of public revenue, and the city could make that income even more stable. A few entries in the Southampton books from 1427 to 1428 are easy to overlook. Robert Flores recorded 20 shillings received from Richard Coton. Why? Because Coton had leased the right to collect customs revenue around Hamble. Another man, Roger Pilley, paid 33 shillings and 4 pence to lease the customs revenue of the port of Lymington. There were also receipts connected with Portsmouth and other locations. What does that mean? The city did not even have to send its own official every day to collect every coin. It could lease the charging rights to someone else. The contractor would promise, I will pay the city a fixed amount, and for this year I will collect the fees. If actual collections were higher than the lease price, the contractor might keep the difference. If trade declined and collections were lower than expected, much of the risk fell on the contractor. For the city, this was an extremely clever form of risk transfer. Uncertain daily traffic fees could be converted into something more like fixed rental income. Today, we would call this farming the tolls, leasing out the right to collect fees. Medieval governments, towns, and lords used this system extensively because it solved a very practical problem. Collecting fees yourself required officials. Officials might steal. You had to audit them. Revenue changed every day. Under a lease, the city had a much clearer idea. This is the minimum amount we expect to receive this year. That gave the port another layer of stability compared with a merchant ship. The ship owner had to face weather and freight market risk directly. The city could even sell part of its fee collection risk to someone else. But that did not mean the port was a machine that cost nothing to run. Southampton also had expenses. First came labor. The water bailiff had to work. Someone had to inspect the vessels. Someone had to record the cargo. Someone had to maintain the cranes. The accounts for 1449 to 1430 include payment to John Bullure for looking after 2 cranes for an entire year. His wage was £3, 6 shillings, and 8 pence. The books also contain an annual payment of £10, 13 shillings, and 4 pence connected with the wharf and cranes. And staff who had to travel farther away to collect anchorage fees from ships received travel expenses. Then came the infrastructure. Wharves broke, timber rotted, cranes wore out, ropes needed replacing, seawater and tides constantly attacked the waterfront. Southampton's wharves had required repeated repairs since at least the 13th century. A port could not keep collecting wharfage forever while refusing to maintain the wharf. If large ships could no longer unload safely, merchants could simply choose another harbor. And here we see the real cycle behind the port business model. Why would a merchant willingly pay wharfage? Because a good wharf allowed him to unload faster. Why pay cranage? Because a crane reduced handling costs and the risk of damaged cargo. The port collected fees to maintain its facilities. Better facilities attracted larger ships. More ships generated more fees. More fees gave the city more resources to maintain the facilities. If the cycle continued, the port became more competitive. If it reversed, things became dangerous. Infrastructure deteriorated. Ships stopped coming. Revenue fell. The city had even less money for repairs. More ships left. Eventually, the port could enter long-term decline. So stability did not mean a port was permanently safe. Southampton itself experienced these risks. In 1338, a French and Genoese fleet attacked Southampton and caused serious destruction. War disrupted trade through the English Channel. Then the Black Death hit the city hard in 1348 and 1349. By the middle of the 15th century, Southampton had recovered into a prosperous port again, with Italian trade playing an especially important role. But later in the 15th century, changes in international trade patterns, combined with stronger competition from London, pushed Southampton's customs income down again. It later recovered. This tells us something important. The greatest risk to a port was not one ship sinking. It was the trade route itself leaving you. For a ship owner, one storm might destroy the year. For a port, one changing trade route might damage decades. So the port was more stable because it diversified away the risks of individual voyages. But in exchange, it carried a slower and much larger systemic risk. Merchants could choose another harbor. Ports competed. If Southampton was the most convenient, ships came to Southampton. If London became more useful, ships might shift toward London. If another port offered lower charges, safer anchorage, better roads inland, or access to a larger market, the old port's revenue could gradually disappear. So what a successful port really sold was not simply a piece of coastline. It sold location, pest infrastructure, market access. Southampton mattered first because it possessed a good natural harbor, then because it connected that harbor to southern England and the inland economy. Italian merchants could unload Mediterranean goods there and send them overland toward London and other markets. English wool, cloth, and metals moved in the opposite direction, arriving at the port and being loaded onto foreign vessels. Southampton was not really the end of the journey. It was the point where sea transport and land transport met. And the port did not make the most money when goods sat still. It made money when goods kept changing transport systems. Ship to cart, cart to warehouse, warehouse to another ship. Every transfer required a service. Every service created another opportunity to charge. Southampton even had specialized buildings for storing export wool. The surviving wool house, built after the 14th century French attack, is one example of the medieval storage infrastructure that supported this trade. While goods waited for another ship, they needed more than a wharf. They needed somewhere secure, dry, and manageable. That tells us something else. A successful port was not a parking lot for ships. It was a collection of trading infrastructure. A ship arrived. Someone guided it. It anchored. Cargo was unloaded. Goods were weighed, inspected, stored, repacked. Carters were found. Then the cargo moved inland. If the vessel was going to continue sailing, it also needed ropes, canvas, timber, provisions, and repairs. Southampton's records from 1448 to 1449 show maritime supplies such as rope, canvas, and pitch entering the town in significant quantities. A whole service economy naturally formed around the shipping industry. So one ship entering port created far more economic activity than the official port charges alone. Sailors spent money in inns. They bought food, sails needed repairing, carpenters were hired, rope was purchased, merchants rented warehouse space, carters moved goods inland. Not all of this money entered Southampton's municipal treasury. Some went to private shopkeepers, some to artisans, some to warehouse owners, some to the crown as royal customs. But from the perspective of the city's economy, one vessel could support dozens of different businesses at the same time. What the port really attracted was not the ship itself. It was the demand the ship brought with it. Now we can put a port and a merchant ship into two representative business models. This is not a surviving side-by-side profit statement comparing one Southampton ship owner with the city government. The historical records are not that neat. The following examples simply use real port fee structures and known medieval shipping risks to show why these two types of assets could have very different profit volatility. Start with the merchant ship. Suppose an owner and several partners concentrate the equivalent of £100 into the hull, equipment, a share of the cargo, and the working capital needed for the voyage. A strong year. The weather is favorable. The ship leaves with a full hold. It finds high-value return cargo. No pirates, no serious cargo damage. The entire investment cycle eventually returns £125. After the additional crew, food, repair, and voyage expenses are deducted, perhaps £15 to £20 remain as profit. Excellent. That is exactly why merchant shipping was worth the risk. A successful voyage could generate a very high return. Now, an ordinary year, headwinds trap the ship in a foreign harbor for several extra weeks. The return voyage is not fully loaded. Some cargo space has to be rented out at a lower freight rate. The voyage does not fail. The ship returns safely, but only around 5 pounds of profit remain. Dozens of sailors worked for months. The capital was exposed at sea for months. The final result is completely ordinary. Now a weak year, a storm damages part of the cargo. The ship is forced into port for repairs. A sailor dies. The return voyage misses the best market window. Some cargo may even have to be thrown overboard. The ship survives and comes home. But of the original 100 pounds of capital, only 70 comes back. One voyage loses 30 pounds. And if the ship itself sinks, the situation becomes much worse. Medieval merchants understood this concentration of risk very well. That is why ship ownership could be divided into shares. Cargo could also be spread across several vessels. At least then, one accident did not destroy an entire fortune. Now look at the port. Instead of treating the port like one ship, think of it as a basket of fee streams: anchorage, cranage, wharfage, local customs, overland transfer, and some toll rights leased out to private collectors. In a strong year, Italian carracks, Flemish ships, Portuguese vessels, and English coastal traders all arrive in large numbers. Every vessel contributes only a small amount. No single ship determines the result for the year. Even if one Genoese merchant loses money, the city can still keep collecting fees from dozens of other merchants. In an ordinary year, perhaps 2 fewer Italian ships arrive. Volumes of certain goods decline. Port revenue falls. But coastal English trade continues. Wine continues. Fish, iron, other goods keep moving. Many infrastructure fees can still be collected. A weak year becomes truly dangerous only when war or some larger disruption causes traffic across the entire channel to collapse. At that point, it is no longer one ship having trouble. Many ships stop coming at once. And the revenue streams all decline together. So from a risk perspective, the merchant ship fears a single disaster. The port fears the disappearance of long-term traffic. The first risk can be sudden and violent. The second usually develops more slowly. That is what stability really means here. Not that a port always made money, but that under normal conditions, no single ship could destroy its annual cash flow. Robert Floris's real accounts for 1427 to 1428 show this structure very clearly. Total local petty customs revenue for the year, 214,000, 15 shillings and 3 to 5 pence. The same accounts recorded roughly one. That amount was later passed into Southampton's wider municipal financial system. But we should not simply call those 37 pounds port net profit, because the expenses in the account were not limited to repairing the wharf and paying harbor workers. They also included payments to city officials, annuities, and financial obligations such as Southampton's fee farm. This was a medieval municipal officer's account, not the income statement of a modern port company. The important thing is the way money entered the system. Almost no single transaction was spectacular. Many charges were only a few pence or a few shillings. The final amount became large because of repetition. 4 pence anchorage, next ship. 2 pence keelage, next ship. 10 shillings cranage, next cargo. A few pence wharfage, next cargo again. A merchant ship hoped to make a large profit from a single voyage. The port was happy to keep only a little from each transaction, then let the entire trading network repeat the process hundreds of times. In another set of Southampton accounts from 1429 to 1430, Robert Floris recorded total receipts of roughly 293. And the same books still show the same ordinary details: Italian carracks paying 3 shillings and 4 pence in anchorage, crane keepers receiving annual wages, port officials receiving travel expenses to go out and collect anchorage fees, large sums then being transferred into other municipal obligations. The real strength of the port. For a ship owner, the most dramatic events often determine profit: a storm, pirates, one exceptionally valuable cargo, a return voyage with every inch of the hold full. For a port, the best year might contain nothing dramatic at all. Ships simply keep arriving. The cranes keep working. There may be no great story in a year like that, but it is exactly the kind of year that leaves money behind. So why could a medieval port make money more reliably than the merchant ships that stopped there? First, because the port spread risk across many vessels. The ship owner bet on his own ship. The port bet on everyone's ships. Second, because the port sold access and services rather than taking a share of commodity profits. A merchant could lose money selling wine and still have used the crane. Third, because the same infrastructure could generate revenue over and over again. The wharf served one ship today. Fourth, because the port could stack fees: anchorage, docking, unloading, crane use, local duties, overland transfer. Not every cargo paid every charge, but a single flow of goods could pass through several fee-generating points. Fifth, some collection rights could even be leased out. The port could convert uncertain daily fees into a more predictable annual payment from a contractor. A ship owner had no equivalent option. He could not tell someone else, "You handle this storm." He could only spread the risk among more investors through partnerships and shares. But the port business also had one enormous danger that the ship owner did not face. A merchant ship could change its route. Southampton could not. A port cannot move. If London became more attractive, if foreign merchants changed their routes, if war cut off the channel, or if another harbor built better infrastructure, Southampton had to stay exactly where it was and watch the ships pass by. So the most important asset of a port was never the stone wharf itself. It was the belief among merchants that this is the easiest place to use, the safest place to stop, the easiest place to find customers, and the best place to move maritime cargo into the English interior. Once that belief disappeared, even the strongest wharf was just stone. That is the most interesting business difference between a port and a ship. The ship could move, but it carried the risks of movement. The port could not move, but it made money from everyone else moving. When that Genoese carrack finally finished unloading and the merchants began sending their woad, soap, and wine across England, their commercial adventure was really only beginning. They still had to find buyers, wait for payment, face changing prices, and find suitable cargo for the return journey to the Mediterranean. Southampton had already completed the first part of its own business. The ship arrived, anchorage was paid, the cargo came ashore, crane fees were recorded, the wharf was used, the goods moved inland, and a few more lines appeared in the city's account book. The merchant ship looked like the more spectacular business, a huge hull, long-distance voyages, a hold full of valuable goods. One successful return trip could make investors rich very quickly. The port's accounts were much less exciting. They simply repeated a few pence and a few shillings over and over again. But that was exactly why the business was more stable. A merchant ship depended on one voyage succeeding. A port depended on the fact that every voyage eventually had to stop somewhere. A ship sold the ability to carry goods far away. A port made money by making sure that everyone who reached that distant place had to pass through it first.